26 years ago, Hugh Hefner took $6,000 and an idea that linked sex with upward mobility and started Playboy magazine. Over the years, the idea and the magazine have grown into an international empire. Today, Playboy Enterprises includes 3 magazines, 21 clubs and casinos in 7 countries, a book publishing company, and a public service foundation. It's all worth about $250 million. If Hefner were grooming his 23-year-old son to take over the business, no one would pay much attention. But it's not his son who's being groomed. It's his 27-year-old daughter. His 27-year-old Phi Beta Kappa, summa cum laude from Brandeis University, feminist daughter. We went to Playboy corporate headquarters in Chicago recently and spent a few days with Christy Hefner, already crowned by one writer as Playboy's heir apparent.
Suggested, and I said,
But first things first, bunnies. Next to the nude centerfold, the Playboy bunny is the company's most famous symbol. The first bunny came to work here at the original Playboy Club in Chicago 20 years ago. Since then, some 10,000 young women all over the world have donned the long black stockings, the high on the thigh, low on the bosom costumes, the fluffy tails, and of course, the famous ears. No, this isn't a bunny. This is Christy Hefner. The symbols of her job as a Playboy vice president are not ears and a tail, but a briefcase, a tennis racket, and a clutch of photographers recording her every executive move. Christy's work as a corporate executive involves developing new publications and overseeing the activities of the Playboy Foundation.
Christy Hefner returning his call.
Work that puts her in such tailored clothes and a conservative setting that she seems more in keeping with Time Inc. than Playboy Inc.
The bunny image, the notion of women as bunnies and playmates that seems so pervasive to people outside the company has very little relevance when you're working inside the company. It's a little bit the same kind of, I think, fantasy that people have about Playboy as when they think, oh, they don't really put out a magazine. I mean, they really just party. I know the truth. I am one of 5 women vice presidents at Playboy, and there are a lot of other women in very high positions, both with the magazine and the company.
Did you ever have any problems at all with working in a place where the image of women is so different from your experience growing up and from going to college and all of that?
I don't see them necessarily as incompatible in the sense that a lot of the women who work as a bunny do it for a part of their lives as a terrific way to make money, and we have what I think is a very enlightened tuition reimbursement policy where we will pay for any kind of schooling that the women are going through while they're bunnies.
Christy is very proud of what she considers Playboy's enlightened attitude towards women's rights. The Playboy Foundation has given a lot of money to feminist causes, like the National Organization for Women, abortion law repeal, and the ERA campaign. Christy herself is on the board of the National Women's Political Caucus, and she gets irritated when people suggest that a Christy Hefner or a Playboy bunny can't also be an active feminist.
I think it's terrific that we no longer live in a time where to prove that you're really a woman, you have to stay at home. I also think it's terrific that we no longer live in a time to prove that you're really a feminist, you have to wear combat boots and only go out with other women.
Other feminists don't see it quite that way. To them, the idea of half-naked women serving drinks and dreams to men is sexism incarnate.
Playboy is legitimized pornography. Why in 1980 do we have women dressed as rabbits on a magazine that sells 6 million copies in the United States alone?
Netta Gilboa and Sally Shirley are 2 feminists that put Playboy in the enemy camp. If women dressed up as bunnies make them mad, then Playboy magazine's nude centerfolds make them furious.
There's nothing wrong with the fact that they are nude, but when they very pointedly undress professional women and well-educated women to say, hey, look, you women's libbers out there, I'm well-educated, I make 30 grand a year, but I can pose nude for Playboy, so what's the beef?
No matter how famous the woman, no matter how successful, no matter what she has done, she is reduced to being a body. Why has Christy Hefner, who is so much in favor of the magazine, not posed nude herself?
for me to be told that I have to pose or for me to say to somebody else, you shouldn't pose, are two sides of a coin that I don't want either side of.
But they always come back to that, don't they? Now,
Well,
why
because
do you
everybody
think-
wants to find the conflict. Everybody wants to break up what seems to be a melding of the sexual and the intellectual that is the heart of the magazine and is what I believe in. It's the other side of, when I was at Brandeis, having just been elected to Phi Beta Kappa, having a dean come up to me and say, "Congratulations, Christy, and you're so pretty." Like they don't go together? Like the women who pose in the magazine have to be dumb because they're beautiful? Like I have to be homely because I'm smart?
Netta and Sally don't buy the standard apologia for Playboy, that over the years it has helped liberate us all, women and men, from puritanical attitudes about sex. They believe that sexual freedom in Playboy, and in the rest of the media, is simply a guise to exploit and abuse women and their bodies. Netta has created a slideshow to make that point.
I think that it's always at women's expense. It is always men in the ads who are having a little fun at women's expense. It is always men who are having a little fun looking at nude women. In a society where we have such a problem of wife abuse and of rape, to show women, such as the Rolling Stones billboard on black and blue from the Rolling Stones, and I love it, that show women being abused with smiles on their face, I think that's a very dangerous message.
Yes, I think the notion that one should be turned on by a photograph of a woman being beaten is a very sick idea. So I think it's fair to say that let's focus on those images that we all agree and understand are clearly dehumanizing and see what we can do to educate people about those.
There have been things like that in Playboy. Is that changing?
I don't think anybody could ever find a pictorial that ran in Playboy that was predicated on a theme of violence.
What about the Dracula interlude with the undead?
It's fantasy, and I guess one person's fantasies may not be another person's fantasies, but the notion that we need to censor our fantasies, I think, is one that I have a lot of problem with, because I think that fantasy becomes, in fact, a very creative outlet for all of us in all parts of our lives.
Whether you believe that the Playboy empire has been built around harmless fantasies, or whether you believe that it's been built at the expense of women, one thing is certain. Christy Hefner may be the only 27-year-old female in the country being groomed to take over a multi-million-dollar corporation.
I've always thought it was a rather nice comment about my father's attitudes toward women as opposed to the attitudes he's supposed to have, that it was never, well, first we'll ask the son, and then if he doesn't want to, we'll maybe compromise and let the daughter come into it, or hopefully she'll get married and we can pass it on to the son-in-law. I mean, I was made to feel very much that if it was something I wanted, and as I began working and proving myself, if it was something that I could do, that was terrific.
Is your job real?
I would be a very poor president of this company someday if my only experience had been with reporters. So I have always made sure that I am managing both people and dollars, and I'm held accountable for the results that I achieve.
Today, her accountability is on the line as manager of a new series of publications aimed at the conspicuous spender, sort of a Consumer Reports Playboy style. And there's talk in the more distant future that she'll be putting out a Playboy-style magazine for women.
I think that this is the best possible publishing company to start a magazine for women out of, because if I were doing it, I would, because of who I am, bring to it a commitment to intelligence and an intelligent treatment of your readers, such as I find in Ms. Magazine.
When you're looking at Playboy, you really are looking at a male fantasy. Now, what would be the fantasy for women?
I honestly don't know. Playgirl magazine is trying in the most direct way to ape the nudity in Playboy for women, and I don't think has been successful. Its readership is at least as much among men as among women, and I don't think that that's the way to do it. But I don't think that you can edit a magazine in the 80s for young thinking women and not have a fairly open attitude about nudity and sexuality, both in the words and in the pictures, and really be speaking to women who are living in the 80s.
The question about Christy Hefner, of course, is whether or not she can keep sex selling for the next 25 years the way her father has for the last 25. When Hugh Hefner began Playboy in the 1950s, it was unquestionably a man's world. But all that's changing. And if Playboy wants to adapt to those changes, who better to put in charge than someone who looks and sounds like one of those young, thinking women of the 1980s?